Let's dive right into this explainer. Look, we all know George Best, right? The absolutely unparalleled footballing genius. But instead of just running through a highlight reel of his incredible goals today, we're going to explore something much darker. We're looking at the tragic systems that completely failed to protect football's very first global superstar. We have to start with this haunting final message, released straight from his bed at the Cromwell Hospital in London back in 2005. Don't die like I did. It's just a stark, heartbreaking warning, isn't it? It establishes the immense human cost of his story right up front. Because before we look back at his glorious peak, we absolutely have to acknowledge where it all ultimately ended. So to really understand how he reached that point, we're looking beyond a simple biography. Today, we're covering 1. The first celebrity footballer, 2. 3 institutional failures, 3. The tragic ripple effect, 4. The nomadic fall, and 5. An unsanitized legacy.
Section 1. The first celebrity footballer, the myth versus the reality. We really have to separate the legend of the fifth Beatle from the reality of who he actually was. A shy, totally overwhelmed teenager from Belfast.
Picture this. At just 22 years old, George Best had already won the European Cup with Manchester United, famously scoring in that 1968 final at Wembley. He'd won the Ballon d'Or. He was standing at the absolute summit of global football. Matt Busby literally called him the greatest player he ever saw. He had it all.
But there's this massive dissonance. Think about it. Today, a star of that magnitude would have an army of agents, media trainers, and sports psychologists guiding their every move. Best? He had none of it. Nothing. He was scouted via a telegram that literally just called him a genius. But when that 15-year-old boy actually arrived in Manchester, he was so overwhelmed he only lasted 48 hours before running back home to Ireland. The machine just wasn't built for him yet.
And that brings us to Section 2. 3 institutional failures, the genius and the machine. Because George Best didn't just casually throw his talent away. He was crushed by immense, unprecedented pressures. We're going to break down how his club, his country, and the British press each extracted massive, massive value from him, all while completely failing to provide the support network he so desperately needed to survive. Let's start with Manchester United. They used his genius to fulfill the dream of a club still reeling, devastated by the 1958 Munich air disaster. But once they finally won that European Cup, and Matt Busby retired, the club spun into chaos, cycling through 4 managers in just 5 years. So when Best was really struggling with his mental health and drinking and started missing training, they didn't offer him a sports psychologist. They just fined him. They basically treated a highly complex human being like a malfunctioning machine part.
Now, think about his immense talent on the international stage. He's playing during the intense sectarian fractures of the Troubles, basically asked to be a unifying figure for a deeply divided nation. Bearing all that in mind, how many World Cups do you think George Best actually played in? The answer is 0. Absolutely 0. Despite earning 37 caps, a mix of chronic underfunding and a broken structural system completely failed to get him to the biggest stage. And in this incredibly cruel twist of fate, when Northern Ireland finally qualified for the World Cup in 1982 and famously beat the host nation Spain, Best had already been retired from international football for 5 whole years.
And then, of course, there's the tabloid media. After this stunning performance in Lisbon in 1966, Best wore a sombrero at the airport. Well, the British press went absolutely wild for it. They dubbed him El Beetle. They realized pretty quickly that building up this exotic, handsome celebrity sold millions of papers. But sadly, they also figured out that tearing him down when he inevitably stumbled, well, that sold even more.
Which leads into Section 3, the tragic ripple effect, the hidden cost of fame. You see, this destruction didn't just happen to George. It rippled outward, most tragically affecting his own family back in a small terraced house in Belfast. Looking at the timeline, it reveals this heartbreaking parallel journey. As George's fame just skyrocketed, it created this relentless fishbowl of press publicity. His mother, Anne, who was a shy, intelligent woman and, crucially, a strict teetotaler, actually descended into hidden alcoholism just to cope with having reporters literally camped on her doorstep. She tragically passed away at just 54 years old. That's 2 lives in one family destroyed by the exact same terrifying pressures.
Moving on to Section 4, the nomadic fall, the pitch versus the pub. In his post-United years, Best became a sort of footballing nomad. He was bouncing across continents from Los Angeles to Scotland to South Africa, leaving behind a trail of these famous, often shockingly self-aware quotes. Despite his struggles and his premature exit from top-flight football at age 27, he never lost the profound respect of his peers. He really held on to this ultimate compliment from Pelé, calling him the greatest in the world. It served as a constant reminder of the undeniable magic he possessed on the pitch. But he also fully embraced that rock star persona with an incredibly sharp wit. Quotes like this one capture the sheer absurdity of his status and the crazy temptations constantly placed right in front of him. He leaned hard into the image the media created for him. Honestly, it was likely a defense mechanism. And there's this wildly famous anecdote that perfectly captures the supreme irony of his public image. A hotel bellboy walks in to deliver champagne, sees Best completely covered in casino cash on a bed with Miss World, and earnestly asks, "Mr. Best, where did it all go wrong?" What looked like the absolute pinnacle of success and glamour to outsiders was in reality the chaotic unraveling of a deeply sick man. Because behind the witty quotes and the bravado, the reality of his decline is grim. The drinking wasn't just some quirky character trait. It was a symptom of intense isolation that accelerated into a severe, crippling addiction. This ultimately led to a 1984 prison sentence for drunk driving, deeply unacceptable instances of domestic violence against his partners, and finally a 2002 liver transplant that tragically couldn't save him. Finally, Section 5, an unsanitized legacy. How exactly does society remember a flawed genius today? It's really fascinating to dive into research from academics at Queen's University Belfast on this. They study what they term the museumification of George Best, looking at how cities actually rebrand themselves using their famous sons to stimulate cultural tourism. And the researchers draw a brilliant comparison here. While a city like Liverpool often engages in what they call destory, basically sanitizing John Lennon's history to neatly clean up past unpleasantries, Belfast's adoption of Best is incredibly raw and divisive. His alcoholism, the violence, his tragic flaws, they aren't hidden away at all. They remain a very central, heavily debated part of his public memory. His legacy is permanently, yet very contentiously, stamped all over Belfast. His 2005 funeral drew a staggering 100,000 mourners, briefly uniting a fiercely divided city. But when they decided to rename the Belfast City Airport after him, public opinion was totally split. Only 52% were actually in favor. Today, you can run his childhood home for £70 a night, and there's a bronze statue standing at Windsor Park. It really forces us to ask how we memorialize our heroes today. He is cherished, for sure, but forever controversial. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. When we look back at the incredible highs and the truly devastating lows of the world's very first celebrity footballer, should we just blame the man who struggled so deeply with addiction? Or should we look at the club, the country, and the media who built the fire, handed a 15-year-old boy to it, and then spent 40 years asking why he burned?